Hi, my name is Finley Bell. I'm competing in informative speaking, and the title of my piece is A Trip to the Movie Theaters. I'm competing in the online 2020 Willard Invitational, and if my judge is not ready, you can go ahead and pause this video. But if you are, I will begin in 5, 4, 3, 2. Before it closed down, I spent the majority of my childhood at the Palace Theaters in Springfield, Missouri. You see, from my summers from age 5 to about 11 years old, I always loved going to my grandma's house. Because unlike daycare or summer camp, I had the personal freedom to do whatever I liked. But in addition, I always knew that not too far down the road was a large Sprite, a large tub of popcorn, and an enjoyable 2.5-hour film if I was able to get my hands a hold of it. You see, the fact is, I fell in love with movies at such a young age, not because I remember such fond memories of watching the How to Train Your Dragon movies, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, or the end of the Harry Potter films, but also because I remember going with my grandma and my family. I remember the Time Warp Tuesdays, where for only just a couple of dollars, I could see the Goonies and Ghostbusters for the very first time. Connecting with my family was a major plus, but getting able to fall in love with fake stories and interesting visuals really helped inspire me in my daily life. So today, we're not only going to appreciate the history of movies and cinemas, but we're also going to take a look at their past, but also see the potential future. So let's take a trip to the movies. But to do this, we need to first start off with the Nickelodeon. You see, created in 1905 by Harry Davis and John Harris, the Nickelodeon wasn't the first ever kind of movie theater experience, but it was the closest to what we see today. You see, a Nickelodeon, which was created in 1905, was when a silent black and white film that lasted from about 15 minutes to an hour was projected on some kind of storefront inside potentially a grocery store, or even had its own theater, typically with a piano accompaniment. This was so amazing in the early 20th century because it was really nothing that had ever been seen before. It became so popular that 2 years later in 1907, over 3,000 theaters in America had been built just for the sole purpose of Nickelodeons. You see, it gets it in the name. A Nickelodeon only costed a nickel to see, which typically translates to about $1.50 in today's money, and it helped blow the minds of many Americans and moviegoers on a weekly basis. So much so that in 1914, over 27% of Americans were watching Nickelodeons every single week. Nickelodeons help people in the lower and middle class fall in love with the newest kind of experience ever, going to the movies, and it's what starts our historical and chronological order. But we need to see what translated over to the more upper class and other ration of the world, and that was the movie palaces. You see, created in 1926, movie palaces were very different from Nickelodeons, but also very similar. They were similar in the ways that they were typically black and white and a silent film that had a piano accompaniment, but they were so much more luxurious and fancy and amazing in the sense that these were large theaters typically designed to see something like you would sit in for an opera or a musical. You see, movie palaces also had such divine features of smoking rooms, bars, and even childcare day services. Movie palaces were meant to appeal to the more upper class Americans of the times, and it really succeeded. Movie palaces helped draw in a whole new span and target market for going to the movies, and ultimately we have to thank them for helping create such a long-lasting popularities with film. But we also need to see one of the third and last 20th century features of how film was seen. And that brings us to the drive-in movie theaters. You see, while the drive-ins were created in the 1930s and 40s, they didn't grow into popularity until the 1950s and 60s at the peak of American car culture. And this was extremely important because by 1952, there were over 20 million American home televisions in every American household. You see, as American televisions increased, the popularity for going to the movie theaters and spending more money started to go down. But this is where drive-ins helped revitalize that. You see, drive-ins helped to give an opportunity to all kinds of Americans to show off their classic cars, be able to talk, hang out with friends, smoke, take babies and other small children, other features that typical indoor movie theaters didn't have to offer. but at the same time, indoor movie theaters were usually the ones to get A-list movies because they weren't seasonal. They lasted all year round. And they typically lasted longer with the amount of movies they showed every week. And as American televisions began to increase and the love for indoor, more convenient movie theaters began to increase as well, the love for drive-ins began to decrease. And this is truly tragic, and we can see it today where as of 2020, there are less than 400 drive-in theaters left in the United States, and 75% of them are privately owned and in decline. But it's important to note that drive-ins helped revitalize inspiration for a dying industry of the times. You see, Winston Churchill says, "An optimist will always see innovation in difficulty." And that's important to note as we go forward into the innovation of the 21st century. Starting off, we need to dive into the history of IMAX. It all began when a group of Canadian experimental filmmakers tried creating a large screen film process at Expo 67. They did this by combining 9 digital projectors of the 1960s to create a movie-going experience unlike anything that had ever been seen before in global history. Fast forward today, and we need to know what IMAX actually means. What are the differences between IMAX and standard movies? First off, IMAX is shot in much bigger film. Whether you are looking to take a movie that was shot digitally and just try and transform it using CPR technology, which is still IMAX and still very amazing, or you can shoot IMAX films in actual IMAX film, which is typically 10 times bigger than the standard 15 by 35 millimeter used in everyday movies. This is extremely amazing because it's over 10 times the screen and 10 times the saturation, warmth, and depth for every movie-going experience. Secondly, there's high-tech sound quality where different speakers are designed in a geometric fashion around the room and the theater around you for specific purposes of sound synced up to movies. And more specifically, it has larger seats, more comfortable environments, and ultimately something that gets more technologically advanced every day. IMAX has over 50,000 theaters across the United States, and is something that's extremely important to note. But every day, it becomes closer and closer to becoming the second best thing. This brings us to the future of filmmaking. It all started in 2014 when the first American 4D theater opened its doors in Los Angeles. What is the difference between 4D and anything else? 4D takes some of the amazing capabilities of IMAX, such as the larger screen, and it only goes further with that. Instead of having one large screen that has 10 times the saturation, warmth, depth, and other aspects of film, it has 3 screens that acts as like a panorama to your left, right, and front. This is truly amazing because your seats are also synced up with motion sensor technology, specifically in a unique fashion to any movie you watch. If you're watching a car race movie and they take a sharp left, your seat moves with it, so on and so forth. But it only pushes faster with this. It has advanced 3D technology that has been around for decades implemented into the theater itself. And finally, it has other 4D sensory objects, such as scent that's released into the movies that is uniquely synced up to the film, in addition to rain, smoke, fog, and so much more. This may sound unrealistic, but 4D has actually spent the past 6 years exploding in different countries, specifically South Korea. You see, South Korea has over 47 IMAX seats. It is specifically designed for the capabilities of 4D. And the only thing stopping America from becoming the next chain in movie-making innovation and technology is aspects of the 21st century. The first being streaming services. I must first begin by asking you, have you ever heard of Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus? Now, I can't complain because I'd be a hypocrite. I use Netflix on almost a daily basis. But the fact is, streaming services have shot up over 13% in the past 6 months. More specifically, while the box office of 2019 decreased by 3.6%. This was the 5th time we've seen a decrease at such a national scale in global box offices. While every American is slowly using streaming services because of an increased kind of value on a daily basis, it does mean the hurt and hindrance of box offices and the movie theater going experience. See, as streaming services become more popular, the quality and the lifespan of movie theaters begin to decrease. And while you love streaming services or not, you are objectively missing out on the future of technological filmmaking innovation. But if streaming services aren't what kill off movie theaters, COVID-19 will be. At the very start of October, Regal Cinemas, the second largest movie theater chain in the country, closed all of its doors. Over 7,000 screens turned off, over 5,000 theaters shutting its doors, and over 50,000 employees losing their jobs. The fact is, while it is a rational thing to do in a time of a global pandemic, it may have been the final slash of the knife to the movie theater industry. Every day the box office decreases at an all-time 30-year low. The fact is, going to the movie theaters is becoming increasingly more expensive and difficult to do for many external factors. Things may seem bleak, but the fact is, going to the movie theaters is such an amazing experience. Whether you grew up like me, hanging out with your grandma or family and going to the movie theater down the road for just a couple dollars, or maybe you went to the drive-in as a kid, it simply doesn't matter. Movie theaters are so much more than just B or A-list movies and stars being shown on the big screen. It's increasingly amounts of technological innovation that only continues to push itself on an annual scale and change the way that thousands, if not millions of Americans live their daily lives. So remember the past and potentially get excited for the future. And the next time you can, take a trip to the movies.